My guest today is a Norwegian creative producer, researcher and storyteller whose work uses interactive media to illuminate some of the most painful and overlooked histories of the 20th century. After completing a master's degree in 1995, she began her career as a journalist, covering tech during the early emergence of digital culture. She later founded the transmedia studio Teknopilot, and in 2013 began a long-running project about the Lebensborn, children born to Norwegian mothers and Nazi soldiers during the Second World War. She co-produced the documentary Wars Don't End, and in 2018 created the BAFTA-winning mobile game My Child Lebensborn. Last year, she completed a PhD at the Norwegian Film School, where she examined the unconscious biases that shape our understanding of children born of war. Most recently, she released My Child New Beginnings, a follow-up game that further expands this vital narrative through interactive storytelling. Welcome, Dr. Elin Festøy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, it's so nice to see you. So, yeah, let's just start. For anyone who's not heard of your game or of this strange bit of history, who were the Lebensborn children?
The Lebensborn program was actually created by Heinrich Himmler during World War II with the idea of creating the Aryan race for the Third Reich. They knew that they lacked people and needed more children. But the result of this was that children being born by German soldiers and women in occupied areas that were considered Aryan were registered as Lebensborn children. There were some children homes, but many of these children were children born outside or inside marriage by 18-year-old soldiers and 16, 17-year-old girls in Norway. Or in the occupied areas, not only Norway.
So this was predominantly happening 1940 to 45 before the end of the war, is that correct?
Yes, during 5 years of occupation. In Norway, the estimates are around 12,000 children.
Right, okay. And did it only happen in Norway, or were there a few other countries as well?
Since the idea was that the women were to be Aryan, it was mainly Northern Europe, but also Denmark, the Netherlands. Yeah.
And so the war ends in 1945, and what happens to these strange families? You know, are they together? Do they endure, or do the German soldiers return to Germany?
Many of the soldiers, when it was known that there would be children, were sent to the Eastern Front. They didn't want these couples to be together. In 1945, the mothers were seen as traitors of Norwegian society by many, partly incarcerated even. And the children many of them were seen as symbols of the enemy and hated because of their genes, and that they shouldn't exist really, and abused and othered during most of their lifetime because of that.
Did the mothers give up their children? You know, they're in their early 20s at this point, very, very young. Did any of them try to raise their children as their own, or were they taken away from them?
Absolutely. Many raised their children on their own, often trying to hide the history of the child. Some of the women were also abusers because the children were living proof of the shameful contact with the enemy. And some children were adopted or raised by other relatives. So there are all kinds of stories and fates around this.
So obviously a very difficult period of history that endures, right? And for many of these children growing to be adults is a shadow they live under for their entire lives. This is not typical subject matter for a video game. What made you think, yes, I'm going to make a game about this?
Oh, that is a good question. Why did I do this? I think I'm a digital optimist. I think we need to use technology to explore how we can communicate in better and different ways. And I was at the time working on a documentary about the Lebensborn children. They were in the mid-70s when we interviewed them. And what I kept thinking is that young people, teenagers, should learn about this. When we learn about the Second World War, we shouldn't just learn that, oh, the Allies, the good guys won, because we, the victors, we created war victims after the war was over by othering our own children. So the idea was to reach 13-year-olds. And they're not watching documentary films on the public broadcasters, but they're on their mobile phones. So that was actually the starting point, was to find some way of engaging 13-year-olds on their mobiles. And they play games. So then I tried to find game developers who would want to create an engaging mobile game about a sad and true story about suffering children.
I think that's one of the reasons the game has done so well and has been, as I said in the introduction, commemorated by BAFTA and has been played millions of times, is because it is a video game. It's unashamedly that. Sometimes educational games can, it's sort of just pay lip service to the game aspect. But this is sort of like a Tamagotchi, isn't it? It's a creature, would typically in a Tamagotchi would be a creature that you care for and look after. Here it's an actual child, a victim of war. How quickly did you arrive at that metaphor for the kind of game you were going to make?
Actually, very quickly, and I have to just mention Serp Studio now. They're this fantastic game dev company that I'm collaborating with. And we've now worked together for 10 years. So I'm so lucky to be, I'm a creative storyteller, producer, who have access to a game studio when I need one, which is an amazing situation to be in. So Katarina Böhler, she really loved the idea when I presented this very strange concept to her. And in our early workshops, they came with some sketches after I had presented the material. And one of them was the more classic point-and-click telltale version with different scenes, linear narrative. And the other was inspired by My Talking Angela, My Talking Tom. And one of the main challenges of these children is that it's so hard to keep the focus on them. Because when you mention the children born of enemy soldiers, everyone just starts to talk about the guilt of the parents. So it's one way of forcing the perspective to always be on the child.
Yeah.
And also in the point-and-click versions, you will see the child interacting with other children. And that might open up for the player's gaze of looking at the others and then thinking, well, maybe the child is to blame in this situation.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to deny that possibility, because this child will also do some bad things because it's so desperate. But your job is to care for the child no matter what, because the child deserves that and needs it. And that's in a way also the whole message when it comes to the topic of children born of war is that one shouldn't deny a child care. So it was this amazing discovery right at the start that this Tamagotchi format gave us all these things, just in the genre. So and then we lent into that hard.
Yeah. And you, as well, for the original game and for the New Beginnings that's come out recently, you mentioned that some elements were inspired by survivor testimonies, and I'm sure you spoke to not only Lebensborn children but those around them as well. Can you tell me how you went about that and how you integrated those testimonies into the game design and story?
Yeah, of course, I did have a quite solid background from the film documentary project, having gotten to know many of them there. And I also got in touch with their own organization, because they've discovered that there were many of them at the 50th anniversary after World War II, because that's how traumatized these children were. They were alone and they didn't know they were a group. So I also got in touch with them, went to their meetings, and I owe them a huge thanks, because coming to their meetings from the outside, saying that I wanted to create a mobile game about their stories, and considering the abuse they've had through their lifetime, it was incredible that they decided to trust me and help me. So all the scenes and scenarios in the game have been checked by the Lebensborn Association, especially to Leftblatt, so that I can say that what happens in the game is representative. But we have, it's the Tamagotchi format. It has this day loop of caring. You wash, you have to earn money, you feed, and you have the dialogue, trying to take care of the emotional needs of the child. But the story you play through is a collection of scenes and things that actually happen to the Lebensborn children. So the instances of bullying are fetched from true stories, and the background story of the child is also fetched from one specific child, where we actually got to make drawn copies of the documentation from the Red Cross in 1945 and stuff like that. So we have pushed as much of the true story content into the game as possible without it hindering the motivation for the player.
The Lebensborn children now must be in their 80s. I wonder if any of them have played either of the games, and if so, what their response was.
I have heard of a couple of them playing the games, and that they like it, and that they feel that is also quite moving for them to actually see an animation of them as a child, because these children try to hide, so there's very little photography, and also any documentary would have to be reenactments, and it hasn't really been done in a nice way. So that's also something that this game can deliver, because it is a simulation of a 7-year-old in 1952.
Yeah. And I suppose it's building empathy from people who are around them. Perhaps they're their relatives, and they can start to understand a bit more what they went through as children and how that filters down through the generations, perhaps.
I think one thing is that together with Sarepta, we agreed very early on that we would use parts of the proceeds, if there were to be any, to help the children born of war of today. So the idea is to tell the story of the Lebensborn, to create reflection on the situation of a child of an enemy, and then to try to take that empathy and translate it into actual help today. So we have created a foundation together with the researchers globally on this, and we've been able to do research and support projects, and also to show this to the Lebensborn children, so that they can see that the way they have been working is continuing now. We've also taken and we'll be looking after the archive of their organization now that they are closing down. And my impression is that the publicity that we have gotten for the game and also for the foundation has been the most important thing for the Lebensborn. They've told me that they have shown the articles to their grandchildren, telling them for the first time about their background, because they've tried to keep it hidden for so long. So there are many moving stories like that. And some of them have been interviewed in national newspapers, finally standing tall and proud and talking about what has been seen as so shameful for so long.
It's an amazing story. It's so amazing. So, yeah.
It's really been a fairy tale, because this was an experiment. I remember we went to Tokyo Game Show after we launched, and people asked us, "Why are you here? There are no sad mobile games." So that was 2018. Well, now there are.
Yeah. Okay, well, Elin, we better turn to the premise of the podcast. So I've asked you to pick the 5 video games you'd like to put on your ideal fictional games machine. You've picked 5 games, you told me, that really are tied to key moments of your life. So very excited to hear the stories behind these. We're going back to 1978 for your first game, a classic arcade title. Tell us, what's the game and why do you love it?
Actually, the first game I mentioned is Space Invaders.
Space Invaders have landed at Selfridges. The game Earth people have been waiting for is now on sale for the first time. With 112 ways to stop the invaders landing. Your Space Invaders cartridge, normally $29.95, comes free with the Atari console and combat cartridge for £149. Space Invaders, just one of the Atari cartridges available at Selfridges. There's no place like it.
And the reason for that is the way one's life and how one grows up shapes a person. I grew up in a small valley in Norway, and we came there. I was 5 years old, and my father was an engineer, and they were building a smelting plant in this rural community. And the locals, they didn't really like this kind of industry coming into their rural district. So when I started school, I was told by the other kids that my father was ruining the valley and that no one would play with me. So I was quite lonesome for the first 7 years and biking around. And there was this one small cafe in the valley where for some reason the owner, she let me come in while it was closed. And they had one-armed bandits there, and they had this gaming table with Space Invaders. So that was me being 12 years old, and that was my first real taste of computer games. And I guess that period, and everyone has something in their life. So, but this has been part of shaping me and also says something about the motivation for working on the Lebensborn situation. Because I have a small taste of what that's about. But that was that opened a new world and a new way of dreaming, and combining that with starting to read science fiction, it sort of started my head spinning. It hasn't stopped since, really.
Amazing. And were you good at the game?
Yeah, not bad. I mean, I had time to focus on it, but I don't know how good the others played it, but I did have the top spots on the
You did.
on the players list. Yeah,
excellent. What were your initials that you'd put on the leaderboard?
I have no
You
idea.
don't remember. Okay.
No. I'm not that much into winning. It doesn't really motivate me that much. I like to achieve.
That's a good distinction. I like that. You mentioned being in rural Norway. Whereabouts specifically? What was the name of the village or town?
It's a valley called Kvinesdal. It's just almost on the southern point of Norway.
And yes, I mean, you described there being ostracized at school, which I guess, puts in you this deep connection to the Lebensborn children that you later explore because you've tasted some of what it's like to be on your own there. At what point did that start to change? Did you get some friends that accepted you and all of that?
Yeah, we moved further south when I was 14. So that all eased up, but it was still the same area. So it really, the big point of liberation was when I was 19 and I could go off to university. And when I decided to go to Germany to study computer science, although I hadn't touched a computer. So I guess
tell me
too
how
much
that
science
then.
fiction.
Oh, it was really just from reading stories that you were like, I want to work with computers?
And also reading about computers and just knowing that this is the most exciting thing happening and I want to be a part of it. And I've often thought that I was, in a way, born at the perfect point. I played Pong when I was 7. I did get to sort of see the start of this. And then going to Germany was also amazing. I mean, there were 2% girls in the lectures.
Wow.
So it was rough like that. And we had the same math as the physicians and mathematicians. So I did break up off that studying there in 92. It was also before the internet. we were sitting with the professor, and there was a prompt on the screen saying NASA. And sort of, wow, look, we're at NASA. And it wasn't really that inspiring for me, who wanted a more sci-fi version of things. But it was fun, and we read William Gibson, Count Zero, and we were part of that whole thing. And Leisure Suit Larry and Lemmings, and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and all that stuff. It was, it really started me dreaming.
Yeah, no, on the subject of dreams, you wanted to work with computers, but did you have any other plans at that point? What was the sort of long-term vision for what you wanted to do?
Hard questions. I don't know if I had a long-term vision. I think I wanted out of Kvinesdal, Norway.
I see. That was the focus then, just to get out?
In a way, yes. And also the whole digital development was so exciting. But it was also motivated about how to use this new stuff to make things more efficient and make them better. And I think that's a focus I still have. Also shown through the game is to how to use technology to communicate the story in a better way. That's in a way my approach has always been.
So you said that you changed. Did you just drop the maths and science part of the course, or did you leave the computer science degree completely?
Dropped it like a stone.
Oh, okay.
Went back to Oslo because the student loan situation wasn't great when sort of just quitting in Germany. Started studying literature, which I also love, and then ended up doing a master in literature. Then looking at science fiction and programming.
Yes, your master's thesis was on made-up languages in science fiction. Is that right?
Well, almost. It's there's this British writer called Christine Brooke Rose, who's written some interesting science fiction, and she uses computer language as a narrative element in her writing. And I thought that was really interesting to see how a computer language should be totally context-free. Otherwise, a program crashes. Communication is full of context and how we interpret what others are saying and how we misinterpret most of the time. So the tension between the coding and reading between the lines, I thought was quite exciting.
Yeah, we can absolutely see the sort of, where you end up, how that's all sort of coalescing in these early years, where you're interested in computer science, but you're also interested in literature and English and telling stories. And yeah, you were on a path, weren't you?
Yeah, but I mean, my career is in a way just a whole bunch of coincidences that I can now see make total sense. And I feel that I've come full circle and that now I'm using everything. But while I was doing the master, there was this note on this board in the hallway asking for people to join the Norwegian telecom incumbent Telenor's new internet project. And they were really sort of looking for all the master students at the university to figure out how internet could be used. So they were vacuuming us up. And I just thought that sounded exciting. And then I ended up becoming one of the first online journalists in Norway, being part of that whole .com wave. And that's also where the second game I picked, the period that comes from.
Let's come to that. So yeah, tell us the title of your second game. It's from 1997.
Age of Empires 1. And we were this bunch of young, eager 20-somethings doing everything online that we could think of. We created a soap series with diaries. We would work over the weekend just to create different sites, seeing if we could think of something interesting. And I wrote I became a journalist there, writing about the internet and tech online for the online community, about online, everything online. And it was just this amazing energy. And when we'd finished working for the day, we would then switch on Age of Empires and play together. So it's really a symbol of that era where it was everything was the digital, and it was the Electronic Frontier Foundation. The internet will be free, homepages, HTML everywhere. So we did that until 1999, I guess.
And just tell us, lots of PC players will know all about Age of Empires, but for listeners who aren't aware of the game, tell us what you do in it.
Well, it's the first time I learned about grinding. Had to have to farm to get resources so that I could build up my defense and also my armies. And I would be mostly interested in building my lovely town, but my colleagues would be more interested in attacking me, and then I had to try to defend myself. So, it was, but it was the first game where we could play together.
Right.
So also played Diablo, Resident Evil.
So you're all in the office. This is like a LAN party with your, cables going between the PCs.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So that was and every evening for months. Yeah.
That's a vibe. All right, well, let's come back to your story. So you describe this era. This is pre the sort of bursting of the .com bubble, when as you say, the internet is this real sort of a project that's come out of academia and feels free and democratic and all of those wonderful things. When did you see that start to change?
Well, around 2000, we had all these mergers. We were also merged and bought and sold and all that stuff. I started writing about IT and telecom for paper magazines and more established media.
What kind of things are you covering, by the way? Is it just writing about new websites and things like that?
No. This was business to business, the big telecom mergers, the whole thing.
Okay.
Middleware, Oracle, the consultancy industry. We saw the emergence of software as a service, all that stuff. And then early 2000s, we started to get mobiles with color screens. And then we started to get the cloud, that we could actually have the broadband on our connection on our mobiles. And then the social media apps came. And that was really the big moment where you had those three elements together and it kicked off.
Yeah.
And then I think the iPhone came in 2005.
A little later. Was it 7 or 8? Like or maybe I'm wrong.
I think it was around 2005, because in 2007, most of the ad money had left the media industry, and then I decided it was time to do something else, because I never planned to be a journalist. But it's an amazing thing to be for a curious person who also likes to write.
And you described earlier turning up for your computer science lectures and being one of the 2% of women. How did being a woman in tech journalism at the time shape your experience?
For me, it's actually been fine. I don't know if it's because I have this experience as a lone wolf, and also because I'm quite geeky, nerdy. I'm discussing the tech
Right, yeah.
with all the guys who are also into tech, and it's been actually been unproblematic for me. I'm fortunate, I guess.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear that. And then, yeah, so you found the transmedia studio Teknopilot. How did that come about, and what were your plans for it in those very early days?
I had met my partner, Sven, by then. I stopped as a journalist and editor, started a PR and communication consultancy firm with a friend of mine, also writing and working for the tech industry. And then he convinced me that I could be a producer in the film industry. That is quite similar to being an editor. And I missed creating content and communicating stories. So with his network, I got introduced into the film industry, started producing short films and then documentaries. And the first chance I got with this Lebensborn documentary, suddenly I decided I need to create computer games. So maybe it wasn't so much a coincidence after all.
So this documentary, how does that come about?
Again, that was my partner who was working with a director who had started on this story. And then when Sven heard about it, he thought that this was really just the perfect project for us. So that's where it
to do
started.
together. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your role then in the earliest days? Obviously you've worked in writing, but you've been doing PR and things like that. So how did you segue into a more creative role?
I guess there was no stopping me. And also, as a journalist, I do research. I do contents. So that for me, that's just a natural part of the job.
And how did you start to make contact with some of the families and individuals in the documentary?
That was really a team effort. We also led by the director. The Lebensborn, they had taken the Norwegian government to court, to the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg, and we worked with the group of children who were part of that trial.
And what were they alleging?
Well, they wanted compensation from Norway for not protecting them and their rights as children. And this case was thrown out by the Human Rights Court, saying that it was too old, that they had 20 years after their 21st birthday to bring such a case to them, which is just totally absurd, knowing that they weren't able to talk about it before they were 50. But there you go.
And also this has precedence because, of course, people who died in the Holocaust or who lost all of their belongings were able to seek compensation from the German government for much, much longer than 20 years, right up until today. So on what basis, were they able to throw this out, the Norwegian government? Like you say, it doesn't seem right.
Doesn't seem right. And I think that the way that Norway has treated these children is really shameful, and one of the motivations for creating this game. I also feel a kind of hesitancy often when I talk about this, because it's a painful topic. But surely our generation should be able to lift this topic and talk about it and make sure that we learn from our history. But people don't like to think about uncomfortable things.
Right.
So,
yeah. When you're sort of entering this story as a journalist, like you say, so you're talking to people, you're gathering information, you're starting to try and understand the contours of it. What was that experience like for you, especially with your own sort of experiences as a child?
Very moving, heartbreaking. Also, in a way, the absurdity of sitting for an evening meal, having a lovely conversation, and then suddenly they mention small scenes and things that have happened that are so heartbreaking, but that are such a natural part of their lives that it's mixed into everyday conversation.
What kind of things stick out for you from those early, revelations?
The most heartbreaking ones I won't repeat them here, but stories about the suicides of some of them who weren't part of the group anymore. And especially, I think, abuse from their own mothers, which is, it's just hard to imagine what it feels like if you grow up and your own mother is hitting you, and you just know that you shouldn't have been born, which many are saying. One in the film, she mentioned how her aunt was visiting and said that if you bring the kid to visit us, we will chop her head off. Stories like that.
And, these stories are happening in the 1950s, 1960s, a period of the 20th century when, there was less therapeutic understanding. There were, it's much harder to have open conversations and things like that. Did you encounter any instances where, one of the mothers had dealt with the situation in a more positive way, or where there had been some kind of reconciliation? Because arguably, of course, when these mothers got pregnant, they were teenagers themselves. They've as well been through traumas. So was there any reconciliation in these narratives?
Absolutely. I mean, the sad, tragic situations I mentioned here are some of them, but some of these children had normal times growing up. It all depended on the local society, of whether the locals knew and decided to punish the mother or the child for the contact with the enemy, or in some societies they didn't care, or there would be a person of influence who would signal that women and children should be treated well. So there were all kinds of stories, and it really depends on the attitude of the local community. And I looked into this a bit. It's called symbolic violence. If you have a person of power who points at someone, gives them a name as a group, and says that they're worth less, then this will often, almost normally, lead to violence towards that group, because it is accepted in society. And othering, labeling someone, is a way of making them less than human, because they are then the one thing that you signify them with. Everyone in a red jacket. Then they're not that human anymore, so you can still be a good person while abusing them, which is this scary thing about how we humans sadly work.
And seems quite relevant to some of the situations in the world today as well, I would say. Okay, Elin, let's come to your third game. This is from 2013, and I think, we can definitely see some links between this game and your work as well. So tell us, what is it and how did you find it?
Third game is Papers, Please. Which I was told about by my lovely game dev studio, Sarepta Studio, when I approached them about making this game about the Lebensborn children. And it's just such a beautiful game that also demonstrates so clearly what I've been studying in my PhD and what I'm really passionate about these days, and that is how to communicate something through agency, so that when you play and the activities you do makes you reflect, so that you learn through your own experiences and not by being told in a voiceover what you should think. And in Papers, Please, it is like this frog in cold water, and then you turn up the heat, and then will you jump out, or will you be in a way frozen and become part of the system you're in? So it's a beautiful, beautiful game that really shows learning through experiencing.
Yeah, we should say, so you play as a guard on a checkpoint on a border of a fictional European Soviet country, and you have to decide whether to let people in to the country by checking their papers. And as you say, it starts off fairly straightforwardly. You can see whether people have the right documentation, and you're looking for little errors or things like that. And then you start to hear their stories, and you might want to let them through because you feel empathy towards them, but they don't have the right papers. And then you as well have your own dramas with your family at home, which increases the pressure to process as many as you can to earn money and all of that. So like you say, you very quickly become embedded in a system or complicit in it, don't you, despite perhaps your best intentions.
And also the way where it builds gradually, where you start wondering, because you're doing your job, you're checking the passports and papers, and some of them you have to deny entry. And then you start this growing suspicion, wondering what happens to the ones you send away, which is the way that the pressure increases. So it's a really beautiful game.
Yeah, really good. So yeah, you make this documentary, and you described earlier in the conversation how you then find a partner, a studio, to start working on an interactive version. That makes it sound all quite smooth, but I imagine this sort of turning this kind of subject matter into a game is also controversial among some people, perhaps who haven't played Papers, Please, and can see what games can be and what they can do. Did you have anyone telling you not to do this?
I can't remember. I guess I did, which shows maybe how stubborn I am. We have a really lovely funding for games in Norway. It's the same as the film funding, which is it is this established system where you can apply with your project, and they need to have a basis in Norwegian culture in some way. And if you are successful, then you can get funding. You don't get everything you need, but you get enough to make do, which is what we did. There was nothing left, a year before we launched, more or less. But we really believed in this project, and it was personally important to us. So in a way, I didn't need permission from anybody else, because we just went under the radar, going for the regular commercially based game dev money that was there. And then the people at the Norwegian Film Institute were really supportive of us also addressing such a heavy topic. So that's how we did it. We didn't really need others.
I remember we first met, it must have been in around 2018 at the Nordic Game Festival. And I remember distinctly you showing me your game backstage, and it being just this quite a precious thing that you were talking about that no one really knew about yet, and you weren't quite sure how it was going to be received or if anyone would care. Then, the game comes out and it builds and builds and has this extraordinary global reception. What was that journey like?
Amazing, shocking. The first, we launched May 8th, 2018. So the first half year was really slow. It was sort of 15,000 downloads. And then we went to Japan. We were discovered by the Chinese. And then suddenly we had 100,000. And then it grew from there.
Why was that? Why do you think China was particularly interested in this story, which seems quite alien to them?
What we can see in the comments is that many are mentioning the Chinese comfort women.
Right.
Who had a similar fate with the Japanese during World War II. Which is also so moving. And and satisfying because it shows that the game actually does what we intended it to do. It makes people reflect on the situation of children of enemy soldiers and then reflect on their own history.
All right.
And we can see this all over the world, which is really interesting because the game is set in a very Norwegian setting, but it still works, which is just amazing. But the big breakthrough came during COVID, where we went viral on TikTok. So I think that gave us 1 million sales or something like that.
What do you put that down to? Is that just the surprising premise of the game?
I think so. I think it was our second post, because we were just starting the TikTok channel, and Elin, our lovely marketing colleague, she said we should do this TikTok thing, and then it was a video just presenting the concept, and it's so different that that really just created word of mouth, and it flew from there. And still so the solid sales have come after that, really. And I thought that a game would be dead after 3 years, but it's still going relatively strong. And a moving thing with the game is that 2 months before Russia invaded Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine were our top countries on sales. And they're still really high on the list now, which is moving, knowing that people in Russia find this story relevant.
I mean, the gamers, I think, sparked discussions about how we teach history. And you described earlier the idea of experiencing a set of circumstances for yourself via a video game, and how that can be a very powerful teaching tool compared to just watching a documentary or hearing a voiceover or even listening to a teacher, I suppose. Have those kind of conversations about how we teach history led anywhere you didn't expect, or led to anything surprising?
Well, actually, I also created a edu version for use of the game in the classroom, together with parts of the documentary. We have 70 lesson plans that you can filter in all kinds of ages and topics. And then I hit a new market, which is the education market, and they really don't have any infrastructure to handle the license of an online site and mobile games. So that really didn't work. But I do have the material, and I know that many teachers are using the game in education, making their own lesson plans around it. But I did test it in 6 different classrooms with 30-year-olds. After playing for 45 minutes, I asked them to mention the main emotions they had. And every class had the same result, sad and happy. Almost the identical result in all these different groups. And then they were sad because of what happened, and they were happy because they were there and could help. Which is really beautiful.
All right, Elin, let's turn to your 4th game. This is from 2017, a very popular pick on the podcast, as you might expect. But yeah, tell us about this game and why you love it.
Zelda Breath of the Wild. And I think this is the game that best represents who I am as a gamer. I have a problem. I don't like killing people. And as a gamer, that is actually a problem. I remember wanting to play Uncharted. I love the puzzles, but then I went sort of around a corner and there were 30 men in grey overalls that I needed to kill for no reason. So it just stopped me. So I just watched people playing that one. But Zelda, I can kill monsters. That's fine. I can do what I like. And I really love the Tears of the Kingdom as well. But the physics system, which is fantastic in the building, it makes it in a way too complicated that I have to get good at building stuff. I'm fine building a scooter or two, but it stops there. And so in a way that becomes a bit too competitive, seeing the videos of people building all this stuff. So yeah, but Zelda is, and also Disco Elysium, lovely, and the things with a more narrative, I guess.
Yeah, such an amazing game. Okay, I wanted to ask. This is, talk about this as much or as little as you want to, but the game is freely downloadable, so it's obviously can be played by everyone. But you did mention earlier that obviously you are a commercial studio and you also have a foundation that you're looking to invest back into. So how does the game sort of, generate income and how is it done in those terms?
So the first game, My Child Lebensborn, is sold for $3. And it has a light version where you can download for free, and then you're asked if you will buy it after half an hour, something like that. So, which has been fantastic for sales and word of mouth, because we have over 25 million downloads of the light version, and we've sold sort of 2.5 million plus of the game. So those sales are enough for me. It's funding what I do now as a one-man band. And then Sarepta Studio has made other titles as well. And now we have the new game out, which this time is produced by Sarepta Studio with me as concept developer and researcher into mental health. And that's games as a service with free download and DLCs, since we see how important the free download is to create word of mouth and get people in.
Yeah, and like you say, the game led you back into academia to a certain degree because you went to get your doctorate. And yeah, to what degree were those studies influenced by your work on My Child Lebensborn?
Totally, 100%. There was one challenge that I didn't get to explore in My Child Lebensborn because it's the more current one, and that is how is it that an adult can look at a child and see an enemy? What happens when we do that as humans? So that was the artistic challenge, and at the same time really trying to understand what kind of magic happened in My Child Lebensborn. How did it create such a strong empathy? Because players, they care so deeply for the child, and they've been asking us to let them continue to care for the child in the game since 2018, and finally we can deliver that with this game. So in my PhD, I ended up really looking a lot into cognitive science, human decision making. And the way we look at a child and consider whether it's worthy or not, the way we then objectify or categorize what we see around us, that is a decision-making process. Biases, all that, the conscious biases are decision-making processes. And it's the same process that we use as players when we make decisions in games. It's the same biological process, if we can call it that, neurological process. Which means that if you create a game where you actually want to communicate a certain topic, where it shouldn't be just fun or engaging, but it should be transformative in some way, then we have to design the interactions so that they can actually provide learning, which means that we need to be able to trust the game and feel that we have the freedom to think what we like and that we're not being manipulated. And that as game developers, we also have to think about the conscious and unconscious biases of the players, because you have confirmation bias. Someone might have the wrong hair color or religion, and it would mean that you stop in the gameplay and you don't really have the same immersion for the material anymore. So that's really what I've been doing in...
I think that, that question that you bring up there of how can we blame a child for the decisions of a government or a nation, that's so pertinent right now, isn't it? You think of Palestinian children or Israeli children, you think of Russian children and Ukrainian children who are, to one degree or another, being blamed or having to carry the consequences of the decisions made by adults in their respective countries. And that is absolutely the theme of your games, isn't it? Like how a child can come to represent these forces that are far beyond them and their innocence. What did you conclude on that, on why we do that?
It's part of human nature. We're stupid monkeys, really. And this is also linked to viral spread, which what happens if there's a topic that you're really not personally invested in, that's not that relevant for you, you will probably not want to put as much cognitive energy into researching this issue because it's not your priority. And in that case, we know that you're more likely to adopt the views of the people you trust. It's our lazy decision making. And now we're into Kahneman, thinking fast and slow, for the ones who read that book. And if we are not personally involved and we adopt the views of the ones close to us, then we're part of this mass thinking where we suddenly go around having views that aren't really our own. And then we can suddenly discover that some of the things we say might be quite obnoxious because we haven't really thought it through. So that's the thing about empathy, is managing to create immersion and empathy so that it becomes relevant to us. It becomes personal. And then so that we walk a mile in someone else's shoes, which is then simulation and empathy that makes us actually spend the cognitive resources to think for ourselves and then know that we mean what we say.
Brilliant. That's so helpful. Okay, Elin, let's come to your fifth and your final game. This is also from 2017, a game that, again, touches on some of the themes you've looked at for sure. Tell us, what is it and why have you chosen it?
So the last one is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Which I really wanted to include because it's trying to do something similar to our new game, which is to address mental health. And I want to mention the lovely Professor Paul Fletcher in Cambridge, who's the consultant of the game, which shows the Celtic heroine Senua, and she struggles with psychosis. She hears all these voices telling her she's stupid, telling her she should go on, telling her she should go back. And as a player, you also have to navigate these voices. And you can feel the weight of how this influences your decision-making, how it makes everything so much harder. Because if it had been quiet, you could just have gone about your life. But it isn't. You're having these forces on you the whole time. So that's, and I also met some of the people with lived experience who helped make Hellblade, and meeting them and hearing how it's affected their lives and how their relatives are now for the first time saying that they understand a bit of what they're going through. And the one man I met just said that the game saved his life, really. So being understood.
Have you got hope that these kind of games are still going to get made? Because of course, Papers, Please 2013, Hellblade 2017, your game. Of course, you more recently brought out another one, but I would say it felt like there was a big surge of these kind of games with something meaningful that they want to say or a very specific point of view that they want to put players into, and it slightly feels like that's gone away a bit. Is that true, do you think?
I think maybe it's drowned, and that we've had some weird years. COVID was not good for people getting together and developing really experimental ideas, because we weren't meeting physically. Mobile games have had a hit. I still think that unique games that are well thought out and that there's a lot of feeling behind will appear, and word of mouth will help them be played. Although we are drowning in projects these days, and of course we have many desperate game dev companies who struggle with funding, and that might lead them to go for what they think are more commercial ideas, which just means that they'll look more like their neighbors.
Yeah, right.
So that's another example from Pocket Gamer. Of course, this is a bit dated, but in 2017, we went there trying to find a publisher, and no one would touch a premium game. Premium games where that was totally out of the question. And the next year, publishers came running after us because everyone wanted bizarre games. Bizarre mobile games were the only ones who could have a hope of reaching top 10 in Asia, where the list is otherwise so filled with all the big titles. So I think bizarre games still, that's a valid strategy.
Yeah, it certainly helps. Being able to stand out is a superpower these days, I would say, for sure. Okay, let's go through your console then, Elin. So we've got Space Invaders, Age of Empires, Papers, Please, The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Wonderful console. How are you feeling about it?
I love it. It's my life. It's not what I would put together if I were to interest anyone in starting to play games. But it's me.
It's you. Very good. We need a name for your console to market to the world. What would you like to call it?
Difficult question. Full circle.
Yeah, that's good. Why don't we do that?
Yeah.
The full circle. Yeah, very good. I like it. This has been great. Just one last question then for you before we go. What would you say to a young creative person, especially someone who comes from a small place or a non-traditional background, who wants to tell a big story like the ones you have?
I think the most important thing is to really go deep inside yourself and find the emotional core of what you want to do and why it's relevant to others, and then build upon that and remove everything that's just flashy and added because of maybe low self-confidence. Don't look like the others. Try to find that thing deep inside.
Such great advice, and I think that's applicable beyond games as well to any creative endeavour, in my opinion. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us and for your work as well, which has just had such a huge impact, and we appreciate so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to my guest, Dr. Elin Festøy. So grateful to Dr. Elin for coming on My Perfect Console, not least because she was in the middle of moving house and in fact was surrounded by boxes, and I think moved house the day after our conversation. So grateful to Dr. Elin for coming on the show and sharing with us not only her story but also her 5 games. What a great thing she's done. I don't think it's too much of a statement to say that. My Child Lebensborn is really a remarkable piece of work, I think, not only in the, situating the history, that difficult history of the Second World War in a video game, but also within the history of video games. We don't have many video games that sort of take on that documentary approach, that try to place us in the shoes, as it were, of a very specific people group, so that we can better understand not only the lives that they've lived, but also some of the difficulties and challenges that they faced. So My Child Lebensborn is really a remarkable piece of work. I first heard about it, as I said in that conversation, at the Nordic Game Festival. This must have been 7 or 8 years ago. And I remember Elin coming up to me backstage. I think we were about to do something on stage, and we had a spare 20 minutes. And she said, "Can I just tell you about my game that I'm working on at the moment?" And, as someone who sees video games all the time, has written about probably thousands of them at this point, it's very rare that you get a video game come along that's so specifically about something, that say, trying to fulfill the role or function of what traditionally would have been a documentary, and yet is unashamedly also a video game. It's not posing, it's not a sort of, a film that's with some vague bits of interactivity in it. My Child Lebensborn is a video game. It's a mobile game. You play the game. It has different outcomes, stakes. You can make interesting choices, all of that kind of thing. And it was just really a remarkable thing. I remember it so vividly, being taken back of what a great idea. This is not just like a video game about storming the beaches at Normandy or whatever it might be. This is about a very specific group of people. And seeing everything that then happened with that video game, the very successful release, the BAFTA-win, then it blowing up and going around the world in that incredible way that we've just heard about. So good. And the recent game as well, My Child New Beginnings, which is not a continuation of that story. The first game is set in the 1950s. My Child New Beginnings is set, I believe, in the 1990s. And you're not looking after a Lebensborn child, you're just looking after a traumatized child. So it's a bit more general, but the gameplay has been refined a bit, I would say, and it's extremely worthwhile, worth your time. I reviewed the first game for The Guardian, really, as soon as it came out, and then also wrote about New Beginnings a few weeks ago for The Observer as well. And I spoke to Elin just after the game came out. So just to give you a bit of context there. If you're watching this episode, if you don't know, we're now doing video episodes, which you can view for the meantime on Patreon by being a Patreon supporter. But they will be coming out to general release later this year as well. But anyway, it's been great. And I hope you've enjoyed this, being able to put in some documentary photos, historic pictures of some of the things that Elin was talking about, as well as, of course, lots of footage from the games that we're discussing as well. Sometimes, the games that my guests pick can be arcane or quite obscure, and, it's nice, I imagine, to be able to see what they look like, as well as hear some of the music from them or the dialogue. I do encourage you, come along, see what it's all about. You can also follow us on Instagram and on TikTok, where I'm doing some reels of footage of the interview, so you'll be able to get the vibe of the kind of thing that it is. And of course, you can also follow along with us on Blue Sky and X. Follow along on Blue Sky. I would say that's probably the ethical thing to do at this point. And a huge thank you to Big Games Machine for all of their support running those accounts, especially to James and Tamsin. If you would like to watch the videos, as I say, it's patreon.com/myperfectconsole. By becoming a supporter, you also get your episodes a day early. You get them ad-free. And once a month, you also get a bonus episode with myself and the comedian Glenn Moore. We run kind of like a book club, except for video games. And each month we play through a video game that was picked by a guest during the previous month. So, there's been a slight delay, with the Christmas break and all of that, but we're playing through at the moment Eco, the seminal PlayStation 2 game from Fumito Ueda. That was the first game that he directed. He is, of course, then goes on to direct Shadow of the Colossus, that was picked last week by my guest John Ingold, and The Last Guardian, and I think, and an announcement will be coming soon, so I hear on the grapevine. So there's definitely more to come from that studio. Very excitingly, Gen Design they're called. Anyway, if you would like to join us playing through Eco, you can do that by downloading it or cracking the PlayStation 2 out of your loft and the copy of the game. But if you haven't got that, then you can play it on PlayStation Plus on there. I think it's the PlayStation 3 remaster you can get via a PlayStation Plus subscription. Play along. Send us a message on the Patreon with your thoughts on the game, and then later on this month I'll be putting out an episode with myself and Glenn discussing the merits of Eco, and it's the first time he's played the game, so very excited to hear what Glenn makes of it. What else? Okay, is there someone you'd like to see on My Perfect Console in 2026? I've got loads of great guests coming up, some really exciting bookings. Do we call them bookings? I guess we call them bookings. But we've got lots of slots, lots of spare room. Thank you to those of you on social media who have suggested some guests, and thank you to those of you who have messaged me on Patreon with some names. I have actually got a couple of the people that you've suggested coming on the show. I'm recording with them in coming weeks. But yeah, lots of room. If you have got someone you'd like to see come on, please do let me know. If you have got a friend of yours who is notable and loves video games, please let me know. Last year, Dr. Greg Suchuk, the co-founder of BioWare, he came on the show because a listener is friends with him, said to me, would you like Greg to come on the show? And I said yes. And so he went and said to Greg, would you like to go on My Perfect Console? And Greg agreed to. You can go back and listen to that episode. But yeah, if you know someone that you think would be good for the show, let me know, let them know, and drop me a line. It'd be great to hear from you. You can do that at myperfectconsole@gmail.com. That's myperfectconsole@gmail.com. It's lovely to hear from you. You can also just drop me a line on Patreon. You can message me on there. I'm pretty much around, or on Blue Sky, or any of those channels, you know. Okay, next week my guest is a Czech game designer. We've got quite an eclectic mix of guests from one every week through February from a different country and a different nationality. Next week it's Prokop Jessa, who is the lead game designer on Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. He was also a designer on the first Kingdom Come Deliverance. I'd not met Prokop before, but thoroughly liked the guy. He's a very smart designer, got really wonderful things to say about RPG design. The studio that he works for, Warhorse Studios, they've had some controversy over the years. So we do talk about that a little bit. We get into that, I think, in quite a nuanced way, I hope. But mainly we're talking about contemporary RPG design, which Prokop is really at the bleeding edge of. And part of that little group there's a bunch of them in Poland as well. That sort of group of Eastern European developers that have had just such tremendous success with games like The Witcher, with Kingdom Come Deliverance, and all those other games that are coming out of that area at the moment. I hope you'll join me again. I'll be back again next week with Prokop, with his 5 games, with one more Perfect Console.